Hello and welcome back to Crossroads of Cognizance, the one stop shop where we are talking everything woo woo, magical, energetic, spiritual, and we're covering the mundane and everything in between. Here, you're going to find that we're building a community around discussion, around connection, or around expanding our minds. And as we do all of that, one of the ways that we're going to do that today is uh, 10 to 15 magical words.
Approximately.
Yeah, we're going to cover as many as we can in this hour, but things that are typically misunderstood when it comes to magical words. You know, if you caught our preview for this show, it was said that uh, you know, words in general can be a little dicey. I mean, I think as the English language shrinks and as we evolve, things get kind of tossed up in the air. And magic, in particular, has an interesting history. Magical words have an interesting history in our species because they've been seen as both amazing, scary, always unorthodox, and so this will be a bit of a journey for us as far as those words are concerned. But before we get too deep into uh, defining them, clarifying them, and asking you about your interactions with some of these words. Hi, Colleen, by the way. Let's get to some introductions if you haven't been with us before. My name is Dahlia Rose. I'm the founder of the Conduit School. I serve my community as a healer, a teacher, a conduit for high vibration energies, and I do this by guiding my students through spiritual development, energy work, crystal usage, energy work services, and spiritual counseling. I'm also a cosmic weaver, so I pull things together, mostly ancient healing modalities, and I use these as supportive practices to help others transform. And I do all this because I believe that we need to expand the way that we look at healing and reconnect with our bodies and feel empowered in the process. But I am not here alone on the show, so I'll clam up and let my co host introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Katrina Rasbold. I am a published author of more than 30 books, and probably two-thirds of those are on some aspect of magic or energy movement. You can, if you look up Katrina Rasbold on Amazon, I'm the only Rasbold that's on Amazon, other than, no, I'm the only Rasbold. I was trying to think of any of my kids that have published on Amazon, and none that are the Rasbolds have. So if you look up Katrina Rasbold, you'll find me and you'll find Eric, my husband. And so that's the fastest way to find our books. Um, Eric and I have also, we're co-owners of crossroadsoccult.com, and we have been in the retail side of magical work for around 8 years now. And I've also worked as a professional witch for around 20 years, been a witch for around 35 years. And by professional witch, what I mean is that I do spell work on behalf of other people. I do readings for other people. I do cleansings for other people. And that's pretty much how I spend my time. And I'm really excited about today's class or today's discussion because we're going to, I don't know if it would be like debunk, but just reframe
Hmm.
some of the concepts and words that people tend to most often get wrong, honestly. And, as Dahlia was saying, magic, the community of magic and the discussion of magic is very much a melting pot. And so a lot of times people will read about something or hear about something, especially now that a lot of magical information is gleaned through the internet, which is
Mhm.
not combed. I mean, it pretty much you can put anything out there and it's taken as fact.
Yeah.
So some of this, you as you listen, you might think, oh, that's just opinion. But at the same time, there are very specific concepts in magic represented in a very specific way. And although we have to be open to this idea of growth and language growth and inclusive language as far as what different words can mean. There are still some standards. And the way that I see this, when I have conversations both in person and through internet and emails and things like that with clients, is I hear them using words often from a fear base or a fear presentation. And I think, you keep using that word. I don't think that word means what you think it means because they're applying it in a way that isn't the standard and creating what's the confusion, I guess would be the best word, about certain concepts. So that's why I thought it would be fun to talk about some of the words that are often misinterpreted.
You know, the distinction of being a professional witch versus a, you know, someone who identifies as a witch and lives that their life by that creed versus somebody who just does the occasional spell. Words and these distinctions are so important. I imagine, I know they are in the energy practices and the interactions that I have on my side of things, with all manner of people, witchcraft or witches, Wiccans, you know, Muggle people, you know, and Christians and so on and so forth, atheists. One of the terms that came to mind, I don't know if this is on your list, was the difference between affirmation and mantra. I found myself teaching that this week in a desire workshop that I was hosting online. You know, I said the word mantra, and everybody immediately thought affirmation.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, no, I actually mean the Sanskrit language where you're reciting something with intention a specific amount of times for a specific period of time. And so that Sanskrit phrasing can do what it's supposed to do, which is to tap different areas of the mouth to activate meridians and energy and such like that. So, you know, just like a small, before we dive into your list, like that's where my mind went. And now, and even so, it looks like Brahm had an idea of
Yep.
misunderstandings as well. So
It is
if we
on
don't,
the list. It is
oh, it
on
is.
the
Okay,
list.
cool.
Yeah. And
Just
mantra versus affirmation is a great example of exactly what I'm talking about. I love putting that onto the list. So, what would you say is the primary difference between the two? I mean, I know
well,
you discussed it a little bit, but I mean, if you were to just boil it down to a few words, what would it be?
an affirmation is exactly its namesake. I hate defining words using the words, but this is one of those that it's kind of hard to get away from. You're trying to affirm something. So an affirmation is a positively presently stated phrase that allows a person to um, reframe or get into a particular energy or embody a particular energy or forward focus versus a mantra, which most are aligned with a particular Hindu deity that is perfect for whatever cause you are trying to initiate when you utter the phrase. So, you know, Om Namah Shivaya is, it's targeted at Shiva, you know, and you know there are other, like the Gayatri, I always pronounce it wrong. The Gayatri mantra is targeted towards Ganesha, and you know, so they're targeted towards specific deities. And if you say them, for instance, the Ganesha mantra, you're trying to open roads, pathways, doorways to something. And so you go on to interact with that versus an affirmation can get you to open roads, but it's more, at least it feels to me, it feels more self empowered than it does calling to an energy to
Mm-hmm.
assist you, which would be a mantra. So you said small definition. I don't
I
have
completely
small
agree.
anything.
No, that was good. That was very good. And where we run into trouble is, okay, I'm a person saying, I'm European and I'm observing this practice that seems delicious and effective and rich and vibrant and spiritually not uplifting, but spiritually empowering and powerful. And I would like to do that, but I'm going to do it in my language, my way. And that becomes something completely different than what it was set out to do. And it's not that, right, right. And so a lot of people would ask, when we first started working Wicca, there were a lot of Latin words that were used. And some of that came from the ceremonial mage practices of before. Some of it came from the fact that Gerald Gardner was all up in Aleister Crowley's business. And Aleister Crowley was very much a ceremonial mage. And so some of that transitioned over into the creation of Wicca, for instance. But it's the people will say, well, why do you do that? Why don't you just say it in English? And it's because what you described, there is a feel of the words on your tongue that is different when a different language is saying exactly the same thing.
Right.
And it's a phonetic, gosh, what is the term? It's like phonetically tactile. So that it creates a feeling that is different when it changes into a different language. So, and affirmations, as you said, those are self-empowerment. Those are convincing yourself of something rather than reaching beyond you to a targeted deity.
And there's something to be said for the words, like even in Latin, when you engage with Latin, when you engage with prayers that have been said, even like the I almost forgot it because I haven't said it in so long, the Lord's Prayer, and those mantras, there's an activation because human beings have said them for centuries versus the affirmation, which again, it's new to you. The words have been used, but they haven't been used the same way across centuries. And so there's that energetic tie of how long it's been used, how long it's been activated. And mantras are very specific to that. I think it was like they have to be said 500,000 times in order to be an active mantra. And so we could have a whole show on mantras. So I'll drop that one.
To give you something really creepy, when I was talking about the Latin used in Wicca specifically, when I was first training in Wicca decades ago, the words I had in my mind when I spoke that just now to you were Ate, Balkuth, Vegadora, Vegadella, and Leolam, which, do you know what those are? For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory. And then, so I'm thinking that in my head, and you're like, oh, the Lord's Prayer. I was like, get out.
Well, we got to remember it, or else it would have been a less cool moment.
That was very cool. That was awesome. So I made a list of some, and then I came up with some additional ones. And what's funny is that I have had 3 comments since I announced on my page what we were going to be talking about. 3 different things that people said, oh, I hope you include this. And it was on my second list, but not my first one.
Oh, how funny.
So yeah, so we've got some good stuff to talk about here. I'm really excited about it, as I said. So I think just right off the bat, so if we've got even 15, 16 words, we'll probably only spend a couple minutes on each one and then it'll be over. But the first one is just witchcraft and a witch and what makes a witch. Now, we went through decades of people, and there's still people that believe this way, and that's fine, saying that you are not a witch if you were not initiated by an initiated witch, that you can't self-initiate, that you can't call yourself a witch unless you are properly initiated in the proper ritual by someone who was initiated by somebody. So it becomes this chain link. And so all of this shifted, I would say, in the 80s with Silver Ravenwolf and Scott Cunningham, who specifically said, no, you don't have to, you can self-initiate, and actually publish self-initiation rituals. It was very much a Gardnerian, Alexandrian, British traditional witch premise that no, it has to be done in a coven setting or by a legitimate priest or priestess. And so that's something that did become really nebulous and wishy-washy. Different people believe different ways. And I don't know that anyone has a specific foothold in legitimacy. I know that for some people, when they're saying you're not a witch because you were not initiated into by another witch, you're like, well, what about the witch of Endor in the Bible? She probably was not initiated by another witch.
Right.
What about the witch in the village, who was just apprenticed under another witch, but didn't actually go under the whole, knife to grail thing. And where we get weird with this identification of witch or not witch, is Wicca. That's the only time that there became confusion about whether somebody's a witch or not. And that was because back in the 50s, when Wicca was being developed, they had fantastic marketing. And of course, your average witch on the corner does not, and is working pretty much in secret. So as with Wicca, it came out as a very strong platform for magical work. I love Wicca. It's a fantastic process. I love teaching Wicca classes. I was Wicca for 20 years. I love Wicca. But at the same time, Wicca sort of commandeered the magical conversation with books such as Raymond Buckland's Complete Book of Witchcraft, which is not a complete book of witchcraft. It's a complete book of Wicca.
Oh, interesting.
Right. And then you got the Farrars, who, again, love the Farrars. Janet Farrar is one of my favorite writers. Janet and Stewart put out books such as 8 Sabbaths for Witches and The Witch's Way and The Witch's Bible, all of which are about Wicca, not witchcraft. And if we look at the difference in those two words, the history of witchcraft is this long, let's say. The history of Wicca, you can't put your fingers together tightly enough to make the portion of that conversation that is Wicca. Wicca is a very tiny part of witchcraft. And so, yes, people who are Wiccan generally identify as witches, but by a long shot, not all witches are Wiccan. And so when we start our shop, we would have a lot of people come in and presume either myself or Eric or one of my apprentices is Wiccan, when actually none of us were. And so Wicca became the homogenized, acceptable, kind of ethically controlled segment of witchcraft. And so people were not afraid of that as much. Oh, they're just earth-loving people who move energy. Well, that's, kind of what witches were all along. But so, yeah, I think there's a real discussion about, again, a whole show just on Wicca versus witchcraft. They aren't mutually exclusive, but people often confuse the two.
I can definitely see that.
Yeah. So the next word I had is altar. And the reason I put altar into that conversation is people believe, or some people believe, and I saw this a lot in my shop, that if they're having an altar, there are very specific things that need to be on that altar, arranged in a very specific configuration, when that's simply not the case.
Not at all.
I think Dahlia would agree with me on this, that the contents of your altar should be totally relevant to your practice and what you are doing in that moment. And too many people get wrapped up in, I don't have an air representation on my altar. What am I going to do? Well, if you're not working with air that day, it's probably okay. So what do you need to do the immediate work that you're doing at that time? To me, that's what should be on your altar. But also in my house for the last 30 years, everything that is a flat surface in my house is an altar. It all has different things on it. They all mean different things. There's very little in my house that doesn't have spiritual significance to it. And so I probably have 30 or 40 altars in my house. And how's your working space?
So I think it's easier to talk about when it comes to altars. I think it is easier to talk about how it should be that personal journey for you versus like what's supposed to go on it, what's not supposed to go on it. You know, uh, shamans in or medicine people in South America didn't have singing bowls to represent, air or whatever. They just used whatever needed to be a representation. A lot of my spaces hold crystals because I'm the consummate crazy crystal lady. Um, and those will go on to represent a lot of things that I don't have. One signature piece of altar work that feels necessary for me is fire, but not for the reason that most people would think. It's not about the element itself, but my connection with fire as an element. So being in the space where I believe that fire is a part of who I am, then I go on to connect with it in that way or use it as a guide or an energizer. But I don't have all four elements on anything, unless you count the occasional dust bunny that came about because those elements came together, you know.
I hear a lot of people that say certain blanket statements like you should never have anything on your altar that isn't authentic to the practice that you're doing. And I my
That's
thought
crazy.
is my thought is, most of the practices that are now working practices for people are, they were created out of usually necessity or invention, and they were evolving. That's why they're still here. And so I will guarantee you that if I'm doing hoodoo work, those hoodoo doctors would have had a Bic lighter on their altar if those things existed.
Yeah.
That you use what is available to you to accomplish the goals that you need.
Absolutely. And authenticity is so subjective. I mean, what's not authentic to one person has to be or could be meaningful to another. So, ill rules.
Yeah. So the next thing I want to talk about is gender based, but it's one that has caught me out a few times. And that is the word crone.
Okay.
Now, I was eager for croning, primarily because I spent a very long time in mother phase. And now that I am a crone, I get a little irritated when people try to push me into a mother role and make me responsible for something they're supposed to be doing or need me to mother them in some way, which is different than a teacher role. That's a whole other thing. But I see people taking on the role, and I also included elder in this because I see people claiming those roles when it's not theirs to claim. And in our community, for instance, I was setting up for our pagan pride several years ago, I was setting up an elder panel. And so I was going to the people who had been pioneers of paganism in our community, who had run circles, who had started festivals, who had started different conventions, and people who subsequently were of a certain age. And so I think it was 3 different people come to me afterwards and say, I was really offended that you didn't ask me to be on the elders panel. And I was like, you're 36. You just got here. So it becomes a matter of, okay, so what is an elder and what would be a crone? To me, a crone is a woman who would biologically, if they had their uterus, no longer be able to bear children, that they're not ovulating, that they are outside of their childbearing time. And yet I see women who say, well, I've had all the children I want to have. I'm 30 years old. I've got 3 kids. I don't want any more kids. So now I'm a crone. Like, No, that's not what makes a crone. And just having been a pagan for 10 years or worked in a tradition for 12 years does not make you an elder. What makes you an elder or a crone or a sage is time in grade and time in service. You need to be fucking old, okay? I feel like you need to be of an age that you have more life experience than somebody who's 25 or 30 years old. And I know people in my community who were raised in the craft. I mean, these were kids that I circled with when they were, 9, 10 years old. And they're now 30, 35. So yeah, they got some distance on them. But to me, when we talk about an elder or talk about a crone or a sage, it's somebody who is elderly or older. What do you think?
It sounds like there is this desire from maybe people who are younger wanting to reach for that role, of, to be seen as wise. I think like that's sort of what comes to mind for me when you talk about that, is that there's a desire to express their wisdom in a particular way, which isn't, it's, there's other ways of going about that, right? And then because I know like in queer communities we'll talk about like elder queers and things like that, and these people are not necessarily super old, they have been in the trenches, they've paved the way for um, queer people to express and be out, and they continue to lead and guide in a nebulous space, because being queer is whatever you want it to be. And so so I can definitely see where there's a desire to reach for elder, for croning, for all of that from a place of wisdom, but maybe it's not the most accurate representation of what you're trying
Mm.
to say. Like maybe we need another word for wise or something like that.
Well, and within the pagan community and the magical community, there's so much room for everybody, and there's so much legitimacy for everybody. I don't see situations, and this could just be my lack of experience. You're going to have assholes everywhere, and so you will have people who are demeaning to younger people or not as respectful of their experience as they could be. But what I see when I see somebody who's, I would say, under 40, calling themselves a crone or calling themselves an elder, is somebody like you were saying, who's looking for legitimacy. And legitimacy is, there's so much of that to go around. I mean, look at our Llewellyn writers that are popular right now: Jason Mankey, Laura Tippis, Zakharov, Matt Aron, Devin Hunter, so many of them, and they are in those 30s and 40s range, and are more educated and wiser than I will probably ever be. So it's just about the age thing and that representation. You can still have that authenticity, you can still have that legitimacy, and it'll be freely given to you if you are demonstrating that. The biggest challenge I had is the people who were questioning me on that were not people I would want to put into a leadership role. They were people who were specifically looking to be honored in a way that I felt they were not entitled to be honored.
That's
They just hadn't put in the time and grade yet. They hadn't done the legwork yet. So yeah, that's kind of a sore spot for me. And I love that people in our community of our magical discussion are excited to move forward and be recognized. We need that. And
right.
so, but figure out what you have to offer and lean into that, and you will get that recognition. I mean, we're in an unprecedented place with the internet and with all of the festivals and cons that go on, for people to make a name and for people to be known for what they're good at. You don't
Right.
have to hide in the trenches anymore. So step up, figure out what you're good at, what you have to bring to the conversation, and just lean into that, and you'll get your legitimacy. If you're not, you need to look to other personality traits that might be keeping that from happening.
I think it's fair to at that stage before you crone, before you're an elder, to look to others. I think that's the other concern. So it's very important to integrate like what came before you as well, because there's still knowledge nuggets there, and there's always more to develop. So yeah.
Yep. So the next word that I have is one that I would say more lay people are misinformed about and nervous about until you explain and explain, until you're tired of explaining. And that is spells and spell work.
Okay.
And I have so many people come to me and say, I'm desperate. I need your help. I don't know what to do. I have nowhere to turn. I need to fix this situation right away, but I can't be a part of any spell work. Well, I don't know. What exactly do you want me to do then?
Yeah.
But and so people don't, and I would include the word ritual in this as well. People don't understand what those words really mean. And in in the idea of spell work or spells, and in the idea of rituals, good old Webster is the lean-to. Nothing changes from that. When we've done a whole broadcast on rituals before.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, and spell work is simply the act of using the energy available to us to direct it toward a goal. And these people that are so concerned about spell work will go to their church and light a candle for somebody and pray to their deity that a certain thing be accomplished. And that's exactly what spell work is.
Pretty
So, yeah.
much. It's not much distinction. There's so many things that constitute spell work that people don't want to admit to, because they just don't want to be seen as pagan. They again,
Mhm.
this. I mean, I think this spills over from the elder crone conversation, is how a person wants to be represented or acknowledged, and it's, well, it can't be associated with spell work, because as long as I don't use that word, or
Right.
if I'm not involved, then I'm okay by the Bible, or
But
whatever
then they'll
activity.
blow out a birthday candle and they'll eat black eyed peas on New Year's and you're
Yeah,
doing spells all the time. You're wishing on a star. You're finding an eyelash and blowing on it. Those are all spells. And
you're praying.
when yeah, exactly. So people need to pull back on that a little bit, think about what they're saying. And these are people come to me with fear in their hearts. I
Mm,
can't be associated with that. And I think it also comes back to the persecutions and the feeling that you're going to be like you were saying, how do you want to be seen in the world? You're going to be associated with something dark and sinister if you use the term spell work. And no, it's just what you're doing. If you're doing a ritual, it means you're doing a series of steps that you have done before in a specific way for a specific reason. And we're almost touching on the next one, which irritates me. This is Virgo irritation here, folks. And that's the term black magic.
okay.
And I hear that all, oh, she's a witch, but she's involved in black magic. She,
Gotta
there,
whisper that.
yeah. Let me tell you, as a witch who has walked every path you can walk in craft, black magic does not exist. There is no black magic. That is something that was a terror term created in the persecution of people who move energy. And it was
Mm,
also a anytime you get into white and black as a division of worthy and not worthy, you are walking a very dangerous ground and you are speaking very hurtful, harmful terms. I'm just going to say that.
okay.
But in this case, what is black magic is going to shift from person to person to person to person to person.
Oh, that's
What
absolutely.
is even malevolent magic is going to shift from person to person to person. You're going to have some people who say, well, black magic is anytime you do magic to hurt somebody. And that's simply not true.
Absolutely, Elsbeth.
So when you do any type of energy work, it is likely by ripple effect to have an impact on another person. And I've
Yep.
mentioned before this idea, something as simple as programming for a parking place up front at the Walmart. I mean, you may have caused a pregnant woman who's about ready to deliver to walk all the way back from the end of the parking lot. If you're trying
Black
to merge,
magic.
yeah, if you're trying to merge into traffic and you are like, no, just make an opening, make an opening, make an opening, let me in, let me in, let me in. And you're, yes, and you get in. You might have had somebody who's trying to get to the hospital and their kid's bleeding out in the back seat,
Wow.
that you just slowed down. We don't know the impact that even the simplest spell work has on other people. And so
Absolutely.
we must always work with the idea as it harms none. We must always work with the idea. Well, in fact, we can't work with the idea of as it harms none, or we will never do anything, quite honestly.
As it harms the least.
Yeah. And so this idea of black magic is a kind of, flashlight under the chin, scary thing that people put out there to distinguish their magic from everybody else's, is basically what it is.
We keep having this conversation about representation right there.
It's really what it's
Um,
about.
I had a person explain to me that black magic, and I didn't, it wasn't an in depth conversation because I wanted to know more. But they said that black magic was, and I don't even think that, I keep stopping at the definition. I don't even think they were a practicing witch, but they said that black magic was any magic that you do for selfish, like, gain. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, okay, but even if you are doing magic for someone, let's say out of the kindness of your heart, the opportunity to gain still exists for you, because maybe you're
Mm-hmm.
doing it because it feels good. Maybe you're
Yep.
doing it because you love them. You're gaining still, even in the instance um that you do the magic. And then there's the, like, I've seen talk of not black magic, not white magic, but gray magic. And all these
Yeah.
distinctions. I mean, I think if it's important to you, I think it's worth evaluating, like, why is it important to you? What sense of fear do you have about your representation, or insecurity that you have about your representation, that feels important to distinguish this, and then dig deep on that, because there's so much opportunity for you to just show up as yourself, do what you do, and change the conversation around what something is and what it is not for you. Like, when I remember being fearful of magic back in the day, and I thought the only way I could get through that was to explore, what does a spell mean? I bought books, and looking into them, and what are magical practices, and what do witches do, and talking to them and befriending them. And there was a period where I was like, okay, black magic, white magic, what does that mean? If I'm going to identify as a witch, I'm going to be a gray witch, and then finding out that none of that matters, and ultimately inspiring others to explore it for themselves, and just say that I don't have a need to identify one way or the other. It's okay to
Mm-hmm.
just be and operate in a certain way.
Well, and you have to look that when we talk about concepts such as black magic, we're looking outside of ourselves for how is this perceived by other people. And we have to look inside of ourselves. And I love the hoodoo concept of reframing that, because it says, is this act justified or is it not justified?
Mm.
And that brings it down to different terms and very personal terms. Whereas one person might figure an act is justified, another one might not. And when you were mentioning the selfish gain, that is another subtopic here that really we could get into an entire broadcast on. Because as you were pointing out, number one, pretty much all magic is selfish gain. It's deciding that you are going to manipulate natural energy flows toward a specific outcome. And so there is some ego involved with that. But the other side of it is, so what? I mean, we are taught by this oppressing force of society that nothing should be done for selfish gain, that we shouldn't do things for ourselves, that somehow selfish gain is bad. Selfish gain is the black magic. What? If I do spell work to get money to keep my lights on, that's selfish. If I do spell work to improve my relationship and my communication with my partner, I shouldn't. That's black magic and selfish. I really hate this idea that we're all meant to be miserable and that anything that we do for selfish advancement is somehow bad. And I've heard the same thing too, that that black magic is about selfish gain, and that but at the same time, people don't think twice about all these people in these churches praying for their mother to be healed of her ailment so that they can have her with them for a little while longer. This idea, I'm going to pray for this job. I really just pray for me that I get this job because I really need it. Well, that's selfish. So are they doing black magic?
Yeah, I mean, by definition.
Yeah. And somehow if Jesus comes into the conversation, then that just gets rid of any idea that's black. No, I don't go with that. So the next thing I had on the list is New Age. And what I don't like about the term New Age is it implies, number one, that there's an old age. It also is used by uppity witches and uppity magical people to denigrate anything that came after 1950.
Oh, okay.
And we have terms like fluffy bunny witchcraft and fluffy bunny magic, and people use terms like New Age to identify things like raindrop therapy and the use of crystals and stones. And there's some people, and I'm not pointing fingers or anything, but there's some people that when they say that, they get this kind of look on their face like they just smelled something bad when that New Age stuff. You know what? That New Age stuff is just as valid, just as important, just as powerful, just as meaningful as any other part of the conversation. And to act like it's not is really shitty. It just is. And so whenever I hear somebody say, "Oh, I don't go for all that New Age stuff," I discredit them immediately. They then have no legitimacy with me at all, because I'm not saying do it. I'm not saying you have to go out and get Reiki certified because I said so. I'm saying that it is just as legitimate. Don't be a little bitch about it.
I don't think I can add to that one.
Okay, that's fine. Because the next one's super easy, and that word is warlock. There are still people that believe, because of Bewitched, that the word warlock is a male witch. And it's not. The word warlock implies a betrayer. It's someone who has ratted out the coven or identified one of their coven mates to authorities as a witch. And it comes out of the Inquisitions, comes out of the old times when witches had to hide and meet in secret. And warlock does not mean a male witch at all.
Wow, admittedly, I have misused that one.
There you go.
Entirely. Thank you, Katrina.
And you know what they call male witches? A witch.
Damn it.
Yep. Warlock, not a male witch. Now, the next one I have is the word coven, which we just used. And a lot of people, they hear different words for lack of a better term, a family or a nest or a group of magical people working together. And coven is specific to witches and to Wiccans, but a coven is a closed group. So you will not be invited to a coven meeting usually. A circle is an open group. A circle is a group that is accepting new members or has a fluid attendance, a fluid membership where guests are welcome. People can come in, people can go. You don't have to go to every meeting. There's not a sense of uh, there's a sense of commitment in that this is your family, but it's a little more loosey goosey. It's more of an open environment, whereas a coven is these 13 or however many people are going to meet every single time, and we're not open to new membership unless somebody dies, or everybody, if we have a new membership, everybody has to vote on it, everybody has to be okay with it. Whereas with a circle, when you go to their rituals, you kind of never know exactly who's going to show up.
Interesting.
So that's the difference in circle and coven. The next one is 4 or possibly 5 broadcasts to discuss it all. And I'm going to leave a lot of this to Dahlia because this is her place of expertise. And that is the word karma. And how often do we hear, oh, I don't want to get any bad karma, or I can't do spell work because it'll interfere with my karma. Whereas my understanding is that karma is a summation of what you do in your life.
Yeah.
And so if you're pissed at somebody and you want to invoke their karma, you better make sure that their balance is net negative, or they're going to get a pony. If the shitty thing they did to you doesn't stack up against all of the wonderful things they've done, that washout isn't going to be quite what you expect. So karma is the summation of, as I understand, of what you do, whereas there's another word, prama, that is the return of what you have done. Basically, it's what did those actions afford you?
Right.
So can you explain that a little bit?
Well, you summarized it very well. I mean, the simplest definition I give people is karma's unfinished energy. And I do that because it's important to take the good, the bad off of what it is. If you do something, you're going to get something back. If you did something 8 lifetimes ago, you're going to see it again if it didn't finish through 7 lifetimes before you got here. And the idea of karmic debt is also, it coalesces with our idea of debt into this like burdensome, I got to pay this off kind of energy. And it I think it hinders growth in thinking that way, because like Katrina said, it's the minimal understanding when there are at least 5 different kinds of karma. The limited understanding of what you have going on in that moment is it's not enough to just say, oh, this is good karma, this is bad karma. And some people are born with very little karma. Those are the people that you're like, man, how did they make it through that? That would have killed anybody else. Or how did they not reap the negatives of that situation? How come they're not wearing their trauma in the same way? And it is because some things, if they may have lower amounts of karma in them, lower amounts of things to address, and therefore what happens to them simply passes through. It doesn't get stuck or snagged on their unfinished business. So perfectly defined. I got no real additions to that.
So the next one I hear all the time, and I always hear it in one single voice because of media. And that is that all magic comes with a price.
Oh.
And people think that because of Once Upon a Time. There was a show that put that idea out there, and that if you do magic, you're going to have to pay with something. Now, there is balance in magic because magic is a natural process.
I was gonna say, isn't there something that you
There's balance, but
exchange?
it's not cha-ching. It And also, what we have to consider in this conversation about all magic comes with a price is that magic is a natural experience. It is a movement of natural energy. And you moving that energy might be part of what was meant to be to create a designated outcome. Should you then be penalized or have to pay for that? No. You are part of a magical process.
Mm.
So if there are seeds and we want these seeds to become food, we take the seeds out, we plant them in the right ground, we give them the right fertilizer, we give them the right sun exposure, we give them the right water, it grows, we get an abundance, it's successful. We are then part of that magical process. Now we have to pay for those seeds, but what we pay for those seeds will be nowhere near what the value of the outcome is. So should we be penalized for that? No.
No, and I don't think, I guess I don't look at it as a penalization, but I'm factoring the energy that it took to grow the seeds, to, cultivate all of that as the payment,
I just don't think nature's that perfect. I don't think that there is this, oh, well, you needed to put in 10 more minutes on that garden, so fuck those
Oh
green
no.
beans. I just think that people get too wrapped up in what is this going to cost me, rather than actually moving the natural energy that is there for their utilization.
Sure. It can't be calculated.
Right. And so to get into what is this going to cost me? The idea when I hear people say magic comes with a price is I'm gonna do this magical act. I really need this to happen, but we're gonna take away your shoes, or your elderly mother's gonna die or something. No, there is no quid pro quo in this. It's a matter of you step into a symphony that has been ongoing since centuries before you were born. And you become part of that magical process, and then you step out again. So for the time that you're involved in that process, the music changes because you were there. But you don't have to, pay an entry fee for that, to play that song or to set first violin with that magical act. So I don't believe it has a price in the sense that you're going to be robbed of something, or something arbitrary is going to be taken from you if you conduct a magical act. If anything, again, same thing as prayer. You don't have these conversations about somebody in prayer in a church, but you're doing exactly the same thing.
Right.
And that leads into this whole mindset where people say, I don't want this coming back on me. I don't want any backflash. And so they think it's this monkey's paw thing, that they're going to get what they want, but not the way they expected, and something horrible is going to happen. The universe isn't sitting waiting to trip you up and make a fool of you for asking for something. It doesn't, in my experience of decades, it just doesn't. And believe me, I have had plenty of opportunities where the universe could have made a complete ass of me and chose not to. So if anybody was going to get it, trust me, I would.
So it's more along the lines of the negative focus of the outcome, because I think there's space to say, like, oh, you may not get what you expected, but you're going to get something,
and you might not.
Right.
It comes into this trusting thing of, whatever happens for me anyway. Sure. In some form or another, it's going to be what I need, but I would like it to be this. I would like to get this job, but don't. People think, okay, I'm going to do spell work to get this job, but if I do magic to get the job, it's going to be a shit job, or I'm going to get fired, or something bad's going to happen. No, there's no.
Yeah, that's weird.
Don't taint your shit. Just do the work. Expect the best, be prepared for the worst, which brings us also to the idea of law of attraction. And a lot of people, that's one of those things I'm like, you're using that term. I don't think you know what it means. People think law of attraction means you just sit and think happy thoughts and good things are going to happen. And
that's toxic positivity.
Yeah, if that was the case with spell work, we would all have ponies when we were little kids. But law of attraction simply means that there is an energy conveyed by how you are in the world. And that energy is going to attract in people who are like you and circumstances that support your opinion of the world. And you can test this by going to the grocery store. If you take 15 minutes before you leave the house and you just program that you are going to have the best experience, that, oh my gosh, I'm going to go out and see people. Everybody's going to be happy. We're all going to be happy to be there. We're all going to be getting food to sustain our bodies. You will have a better experience than you do if you sit there for 15 minutes and go, you know what? The world sucks. People are assholes. And just, I know I'm going to get cut off on the freeway. I know that the cashier is going to mess up my order. If you sit there and program negatively for that experience, you will most likely have a negative experience. And it's because you have created an energy around you that makes those situations sticky. Now you're objectively walking into exactly the same experience, but you will notice different things. You will focus on different things.
Right.
That create those negative outcomes. There's what ties into law of attraction is this idea that if you have a shitty experience, if a bad thing happened to you, you must be a bad person, or you must have
bad karma.
Yeah, you have bad karma, or you didn't your energy wasn't good. You weren't putting it out enough good in. And you know what? Sometimes bad things happen.
All the time, bad things
All the time,
happen.
bad things happen. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It means a thing happened to you. And like all of the internet memes in the world say, what defines you is how do you then respond to that?
Right.
It doesn't mean you shouldn't grieve. It doesn't mean you shouldn't process. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be angry. But how are you treating other people as a result of what happened to you? How are you opening to that experience to figure out what you can do with it, rather than wallowing in the fact that something really shitty happened to you? And I think very few of us get out of life without several shitty things happening to us. And it becomes, are we all bad? No. Do we have things happen to us because we make bad choices? Yes, absolutely.
Oh, yeah. It's a mark of being human.
The last thing I have is a whole concept, a whole conversation again, which we should put on our list. It's the idea of soulmates. Let Bram brought up.
Bram, we're here.
And, here's what I'll say. And this is a really simple conversation. We can make it big. It's a real simple conversation. Are there soulmates? You bet there are. Is there just one per person? Absolutely not. Does your soulmate indicate marriage? Nope. It could indicate you're going to have a business with them. It could indicate that they're going to remind you not to pick up drunks in a bar. It could be that, all of your soulmates have a gift, but that doesn't mean it's a life sentence. Okay. We have soul contracts with people for all kind of reasons. And they're just as much a soulmate as the one I got sitting in my living room right now. I mean, that I'm going to hopefully. I heard this thing recently that was really sweet, which was, when you die, who do you want to have rubbing your hair? Who do you want to have stroking your hair when you die? It ain't the guy that taught me not to pick up guys in the bar. However, the value is there. Okay.
It's symbolic. Here's what happens when you don't pick up guys in a bar.
Correct. Like Bram is probably one of my soulmates.
I
picked up Bram in my circle. Bram is one of my kids. Hopefully we'll always be hanging out in my circle. Do I want to marry Bram? I do not. Love you, baby. I do not. And guess what? I don't think Bram wants to marry me either. But we have a soul contract. I absolutely believe that's the case.
Oh, 100%. I think that, when there was this idea of pushing together families and bringing together people, the sweet idea of a soulmate, like you knew this person before, you're here for this person, just further made the choice easier. It kept couples together when maybe they should not have been
Mhm.
back in the day. And now what I think is very interesting about society is there's this fraying, this idea that you need to stay with a person forever. And soulmates is kind of evolving in understanding. And it looks like you got some love back here from Bram.
Aw. Well,
What
and
keep going
I
wrong?
hear that. I hear it at least once a week, all the time. They will describe the worst attributes of this partner and then say, but I can just feel it in my gut. We're soulmates. I have to be here. So I need to control their behavior and make them treat me better to make it easier for me to be here because we're soulmates. We are twin flames. And I'm like, get away from me with that new age shit.
Oh my gosh, each of these topics we could have like 8 or 9 hour long discussions on, because they're so deeply engrossed in what it means to navigate a spiritual path. I mean, and they go in so many different directions. A lot of the concepts are subjective. Many were objective, like, hey, this is the definition of this for sure. But especially like, I love how you brought up the law of attraction. That is a trigger point for a lot of people. Well, law of attraction doesn't work. Well, actually, it does, but not the way you thought it did.
Law of
And
attraction works if you are surrounded by people who don't believe law of attraction works. How's that?
exactly, exactly. Um, you know, there's so much more to be discussed. We might even have to do a part 2 on this as Katrina's list grows, or as you guys add to it, because how
Yeah.
awesome is it to have you guys in the comment section asking about certain topics and wanting clarity. So keep them coming, guys. We are building new ideas on a lot of these things and bringing to life old ones that are still meaningful. So not the new age, not the old age, we're just here.
Same.
But we are at that time again. Thank you for joining. Thank you for all the comments and the questions, and thank you for some of the historical references. I think me and Bram were both surprised about Warlock and Bewitched and all of that. That was interesting. I'm going to be much more conscious about using that word or not. But thank you again, and we will catch you guys next week on Crossroads of Cognizance. Good night,
Bye-bye.
everybody.